Transfer the account to your stepbrother, or I'm calling your father's attorney right now, and trust me, sweetheart, you do not want that call made. My stepmother didn't hug me at my grandmother's funeral. She showed up 40 minutes late in a red dress, sat in the back row, and spent the service doing math on her phone. I know because I saw her screen when I walked past. She wasn't calculating grief. She was calculating square footage. Before I tell you what I said next, drop a comment and tell me, what's the most disrespectful thing a family member has ever done at a funeral? I read every single one. I am an estate attorney. I spend my days untangling what people leave behind, the assets, the debts, the secrets families bury alongside their dead. I know exactly how inheritance works, how trusts are structured, how a signature on the wrong document can cost someone everything they were ever owed. I know all of this because I learned it the hard way, sitting at a kitchen table at 17 years old, watching my father sign papers he didn't understand, while my stepmother stood behind him with her hand on his shoulder, and a smile I didn't recognize yet. I recognize it now. My grandmother passed on a Tuesday in October. She was 81 years old, sharp as a tack until the last 6 months, and she had never once pretended to like my stepmother. She called her your father's roommate until the day she died. My grandmother raised me after my mother passed when I was 9. She paid for my school clothes, my prom dress, my LSAT prep course. She sat in the second row at my law school graduation with a sign that said, "My granddaughter, the lawyer," in block letters she'd made herself with a poster board and a red marker. I still have that sign in my office. She also left me $820,000. I found out the way you're supposed to find out through her estate attorney, a quiet man named Gerald, who had handled her affairs for 30 years, and who looked at me over his bifocals with the practiced neutrality of someone who has seen families detonate in slow motion many times before. He handed me the document across his desk. I read it twice. I thanked him. I walked to my car in the parking lot and I sat there for 11 minutes, not crying, just breathing, just letting the weight of what she had done for me settle into my chest like ballast. Then my phone rang. It was my father. His voice was careful, the way it always gets when my stepmother is standing nearby, and has already told him what to say. He asked if I'd met with Gerald. I said yes. He said good, twice in a row, which is what he does when he's nervous. Then he said, "Your stepmother thinks it might be a good idea if you came by the house tonight, just to talk things through as a family." I knew what talk things through meant. I'd been hearing that phrase my entire life, and it always meant the same thing. It meant my stepmother had a plan, and my father had agreed to it, and I was being summoned to receive it, as though it were reasonable. I said I'd be there at 7. I want to tell you something about my stepbrother before I tell you what happened that night. He is 34 years old. He has a finance degree from a state school he attended for 6 years. He has worked 11 jobs in the past decade, and I know this because my father calls me every time one ends, his voice heavy with something between apology and obligation, asking if I know anyone hiring. My stepbrother is not stupid. He is something more dangerous than stupid. He is charming and lazy and completely convinced that the world owes him a specific quality of life he has never once worked to earn. When I arrived at my father's house, my stepbrother's truck was in the driveway. It was a new truck. I noticed that. I filed it away. My stepmother was in the kitchen when I came in. She was wearing the particular expression she reserves for moments she's decided our negotiations open, warm, almost maternal. She offered me tea. I said no. She offered coffee. I said no again. My father was sitting at the kitchen table already, his hands wrapped around a mug, not quite meeting my eyes. My stepbrother was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, scrolling his phone with theatrical disinterest. "We just wanted to talk about Grammy's estate," my stepmother began, settling into the chair across from me with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this. Grammy. She hadn't called her that once while she was alive. I folded my hands on the table and waited. "Your father and I have been thinking," she said, "and we really feel like the fair thing, the family thing would be to split the inheritance equally, among everyone." She smiled. "Grammy would have wanted the family taken care of." "Grammy specifically excluded you from her will," I said. "And my father. She left her estate to me." The smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. "She was elderly," my stepmother said. "She wasn't in the best state of mind her last year. I think we all know that. There are grounds to contest." My father cleared his throat. "Sweetheart, nobody's saying." "What your father is saying," my stepmother interrupted, smooth as glass, "is that contesting a will is a messy process, for everyone. It takes years, it costs money. The estate gets frozen while the attorneys fight, and none of us see a penny while it drags through probate." She tilted her head. "Or you transfer half to your stepbrother now, voluntarily, and this stays in the family. Clean. Simple." Before I could respond, my stepbrother pushed off the counter. He dropped his phone on the table and sat down next to my stepmother with the particular energy of someone who'd been waiting to play his card. "Look," he said, in his most reasonable voice, the voice he uses when he wants something. "I'm not trying to make this a whole thing. I have some financial exposure right now, some business debt that needs to be handled, soon. And honestly, half of what Grammy left is more than fair, considering how much of Dad's money went into your education. There it was. 410,000, my stepmother said, her voice still pleasant. That's all we're asking. A wire transfer tonight. You keep 4 to 10. Marcus keeps 4 to 10. And we never have to speak about this again. Transfer the account to your stepbrother. Or I'm calling your father's attorney right now, and trust me, sweetheart, you do not want that call made. I looked at her hands, flat on the table. I looked at my father, who was studying the grain of the wood. I looked at my stepbrother, who was looking at me with the bland expectancy of someone waiting for a vending machine to dispense. In my line of work, when someone threatens litigation, you don't panic. You assess. You identify what they actually have, what they think they have, and the gap between those two things. Right now, standing in that gap, I could see the entire shape of what was about to happen. But first, I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with. And for that, I needed to slow my heartbeat down and let them keep talking. Let me tell you something about the house we were sitting in. The kitchen had been renovated 3 years ago, quartz countertops, farmhouse sink, custom cabinetry in a shade of white that the designer had called antique linen. The living room had new hardwood floors. The master bedroom addition had been completed 18 months ago. I know all of this because my father had called me, excited, each time a project was finished. He'd sent me photos. He'd told me how happy my stepmother was. What he never told me, what I found out myself, 2 years ago, pulling county records on a slow Tuesday afternoon out of nothing but a hunch I couldn't name, was where the money for all of it had come from. My mother had a life insurance policy. She took it out when I was 4 years old, naming me as the beneficiary. When she died, that policy paid out $340,000. I was 9. My father was the trustee. The money was supposed to be held for my education and my future. I received exactly $22,000 of it, the amount that had already been placed in a 529 account before my mother got sick, before the policy paid, before my stepmother came into the picture. The rest, $318,000, had been dispersed from the trust account over 4 years, in increments that looked, on paper, like reasonable expenses: tutoring, therapy, a car, a gap year abroad that I never took. My stepmother handled all of it. My father signed what she put in front of him. The kitchen renovation cost $87,000. I know this because I found the contractor invoice in the county permit records. I sat at that table, in that renovated kitchen, and I let the feeling I'd been carrying for 2 years, the quiet, cold, permanent feeling of knowing exactly what had been taken from me, settle into something useful, something precise. I need to understand the scope of what you're proposing, I said. Walk me through it. If I agree to a voluntary transfer, what exactly are we talking about structurally? My stepmother's eyes brightened slightly. She thought I was softening. Simple wire, she said. Account to account. You'd sign a gift letter to keep it clean for tax purposes, and Marcus would sign a release acknowledging he has no further claim to the estate. And the will contest threat that goes away? Completely, she said. You cooperate. This is over tonight. I'd need documentation, I said. Proof that Marcus's debt is legitimate. If I'm transferring funds as a family loan, I need to structure it properly, or the IRS treats it as a taxable gift and we're both exposed. My stepbrother leaned forward. It's not a loan. It's your share of Grammy's money, which you're giving back. Right. But from a tax position, I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app, tilting the screen so they could see I was writing things down. A voluntary transfer of this size between family members, with no documentation, creates an audit flag. My name is on the estate. If I wire $410,000 to my stepbrother tonight, with no paper trail explaining the transfer, and the IRS pulls the estate return next year, the entire inheritance gets scrutinized, including the original disbursements. I watched my stepmother go very still. What disbursements? She asked. From Grammy's estate, I said smoothly. Gerald mentioned there were some administrative costs in the last 2 years of her life. Caregiver payments, that kind of thing. I'd want to make sure everything is properly documented before I transfer anything, so there are no questions later. I paused. You know how it is. Once an estate gets audited, they look at everything. Every account connected to the family. My father set down his mug. I have a suggestion, I said, before anyone could speak. Let me draft the documentation tonight. Properly. A structured family settlement agreement. A gift letter. A release of claims. I do this for clients all the time. It takes a few hours. I can have it ready by morning. We all sign it with a notary. And the transfer goes through cleanly. No audit risk. No loose ends. My stepmother studied me. She was smart. She had always been smart. But she was also, in this moment, deeply motivated to believe I was cooperating. And that motivation was doing most of her thinking for her. You'd have the documents ready by morning? She asked. By 9 a.m., I said. I just need a few things from you tonight. I need the account numbers for the receiving account, Marcus's account, wherever the funds would go. I need a written statement of the debt Marcus is carrying, creditor name and amount, so I can structure the transfer narrative correctly, and I need you to send me documentation of the estate assets, the full list Gerald provided at the reading. Why do you need that? My stepbrother asked. Because a settlement agreement has to reference the total estate value to be legally valid, I said. If the document just says $410,000 with no reference to what it's settling, it's not enforceable. If it's not enforceable, your release of claims isn't binding either. You could take the money and still come back later with the will contest. I spread my hands. I'm protecting all of us. My stepmother nodded slowly. She sent me the documents from her own email, right there at the table. I watched her do it. The account number for my stepbrother's account. The debt statement. A personal loan from a private lender. $390,000, due in 30 days. The estate asset summary. I thanked them. I said I'd be in touch by morning. I drove home. I want to stop here and tell you about something I'd been carrying for 2 years without telling anyone. When I pulled those county records, when I traced the disbursements from my mother's insurance trust and understood what had happened to $318,000 that should have been mine, I did not go to my father. I did not go to an attorney. I did not cry or scream or send a long text message at 2 a.m. that I would regret in the daylight. I opened a file on my computer and I started documenting every disbursement, cross-referenced with the family's financial records. I could access tax returns my father had shared with me for help, bank statements from an account I had been briefly added to during a real estate transaction 5 years earlier, the permit records, the contractor invoices. I built a paper trail the way I build them for clients, methodically, quietly, without anger, because anger is expensive and I couldn't afford it. I had been waiting for the right moment to use it. My grandmother's death was not the right moment. My grandmother's death was grief, and grief deserved to be grief. Uncomplicated, for at least a few days. But my stepmother, sitting across from me in a renovated kitchen paid for with my mother's life insurance and asking me to hand over my grandmother's inheritance to cover her son's gambling debt. That was the right moment. I worked until 4 a.m. I drafted a document. It was, on its face, exactly what I had promised. A family settlement agreement, a gift letter, a release of claims. It was meticulously formatted, properly captioned, full of the kind of language that sounds irrefutable to people who don't read legal documents for a living. What it also was, and what they would not see, because they would read the summary and not the operative clauses, was an acknowledgement. Buried in Section 7, subsection C, in the language of a mutual release, was a clause that read, "The parties acknowledge and agree that all prior financial transactions between the parties, including but not limited to disbursements from the trust established under Docket No. Case number I had pulled from the county probate records, are hereby confirmed and ratified, and the parties agree that no further claims arising from said transactions shall be subject to dispute." In plain English, by signing this document, my stepmother would be confirming that the disbursements from my mother's trust, every last dollar of the $318,000, had been legitimate. She would be signing a document that said so, under penalty of perjury, except they hadn't been legitimate, and I had 2 years of documentation proving it. The clause wouldn't transfer the money back to me on its own. That's not how it works. But it would be the foundation of the most airtight civil suit any judge in this county had ever seen. And it would give me leverage, real leverage, not a bluff that I had not had before. I also drafted a second document. This one was not for them. At 9 a.m., I texted my stepmother. "Documents are ready. I can come by, or I can send a mobile notary to the house if that's easier." She replied in 4 minutes. "Send the notary. We want to get this done." The notary arrived at 10. I was not there in person. I watched via video call, my phone propped on the kitchen counter, the screen showing my stepmother and stepbrother, and my father sitting at the table. My father, who still wasn't quite meeting anyone's eyes as the notary walked them through the pages. My stepmother read quickly, the way people read contracts when they've already decided to sign them. My stepbrother didn't read at all. He just waited for the tabs. They signed. The notary confirmed. The seal went green. I waited exactly 4 hours. Then I called my stepmother. "I need to tell you something," I said. "And I want you to hear all of it before you respond." Silence on the other end. "The document you signed this morning includes an acknowledgement of the trust disbursements from my mother's estate. You've confirmed, under penalty of perjury, that those transactions were legitimate. I have 2 years of documentation showing they weren't. I've already submitted a civil complaint to the probate court referencing the signed acknowledgement as Exhibit A." She said my name. "The complaint documents $318,000 in unauthorized disbursements, plus interest accrued over 19 years, plus an additional claim for breach of fiduciary duty, since my father was the trustee and you directed those transactions." I kept my voice level, the way I keep it in depositions. "The total claim is $521,000, which, you'll notice, is larger than my grandmother's inheritance. You can't. I also want you to know that I have not sent anything to the IRS yet regarding the unreported nature of those disbursements. That's a separate matter, and it's up to you whether it becomes one." The line was very quiet. "What do you want?" she finally said. The settlement agreement you signed also includes a release of claims against my grandmother's estate, I said. Which means the will contest is off the table. That part was real. I kept my word. I paused. As for the civil complaint, I'm willing to withdraw it. In exchange for a full accounting of every dollar dispersed from my mother's trust, a signed confession of the unauthorized transfers notarized and submitted to the probate court, and a structured repayment plan for the $318,000, beginning within 90 days. We don't have that kind of money. I know, I said. That's why I included a repayment plan. 15 years. 3% interest. It's a better deal than any court would give you. There was a long silence. I listened to my stepmother breathe. Does your father know? She asked. Not yet, I said. That's also your choice. I want to tell you what happened in the days after, because I think it matters. My father called me that evening. His voice was different, not careful, not managed, just tired. A tiredness I recognized from when I was very young, from before my stepmother, from the years when it was just the two of us and the world was smaller and harder and somehow more honest. He said, "She told me what you did." I said, "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't know about your mother's trust. I want you to know that." I signed the papers she gave me. I didn't read them the way I should have. I believed him. I had always believed that, underneath everything, underneath the years of distance and the missed graduations and the phone calls that always somehow circled back to my stepbrother's latest disaster, I believed that my father was not a villain. He was something more ordinary and more sad than that. He was a man who had handed his judgment to someone else and paid for it in a currency that wasn't his. "I know," I said again. He asked if he could take me to dinner. I said yes. We went the following Thursday, just the two of us, to a diner we used to go to when I was little, the kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that comes in a carafe. We sat for 3 hours. He told me things he hadn't told me in years. I told him things I'd been holding for longer than I knew. It wasn't fixed. Some things don't fix. But it was a beginning, which is more than I had the week before. My stepmother agreed to the repayment terms. The civil complaint was withdrawn. The confession was signed and notarized and submitted to the probate court on a gray Friday morning in November. And when Gerald called me to confirm receipt, he said, with the measured understatement of a man who had practiced law for 40 years, "I have to say, counselor, that was some very elegant drafting." My stepbrother paid off his debt through his own means, which involved selling the new truck and moving back into a room in his mother's house, and I will confess that I did not feel particularly sorry about either of those things. My grandmother's $820,000 is in a trust of my own making now. Properly structured, properly documented, the kind of document I spend my days building for other people, ironclad and quiet and exactly mine. On the 1st of December, I opened the office I'd been planning for 3 years. The sign on the door says my name. The poster my grandmother made me, my granddaughter, the lawyer, in red block letters, is framed behind my desk. The first case I took was a woman my grandmother's age trying to protect her estate from a family that had mistaken her love for unlimited access. I knew exactly how to help her. I built the walls. I closed the doors. I made sure that when she was gone, what she had worked for would go where she intended it. To the people who had actually earned it, not to the ones who had simply been standing nearby, waiting for her to stop breathing so they could do the math. My grandmother used to say, "The people who love you will never ask you to make yourself smaller to make them more comfortable." I used to think that was about kindness. Now I understand it was about law, about the documents that hold the line when people forget their promises, about the signatures that mean something, and the ones that mean something else entirely. I signed nothing that night at my father's kitchen table. They signed everything. And every word of it was true. If you've ever had someone try to take what's yours and call it fair, you already know the rest of this story. Leave a comment. Tell me what they told you it was. I'm reading all of them.